My wolf was dying, and because a bonded king dies with his wolf, so was I. I felt it as a cold coming up through the floor of my own chest, Scarn's failing carried along the life thread that had run between us since I was a boy of 9, and he a pup with paws too big for him. 3 days since the border, and the poison on that rival blade had done what no honest wound ever could. It had gone past the muscle of him and into the thread itself. When he shuddered on the kennel straw, I shuddered on my throne. When his breath caught, mine caught. We were 2 ends of one rope, and someone had set fire to the middle. Stand back from him, my king. Master Healer Bram pressed himself to the far stone wall, 3 of his apprentices behind him, all of them the color of curdled milk. He's past reaching. He'll take the hand off anyone who tries. Scarn lay in the center of the great kennel hall, and around him the flagstones were dark. He had savaged the first healer who came near, torn the sleeve and forearm of the second, and after that no one would go closer than the length of a spear. He was the size of a small horse, gray shot through with iron, his muzzle scarred from a lifetime of standing between me and every blade meant for my throat. Now he raged because he was in agony and did not understand it, and every wolf in Highmark could feel him dying, and every one of them had gone silent in their dens, the way wolves go silent for the dead. I pushed up off the throne. The hall tilted. One of my war captains rolled, caught my elbow before I went down. "Sire, let go of me. You cannot go to him if he strikes you. If he dies, I die anyway." I heard my own voice come out flat and cracked. "So let go of my arm, rolled, and let me be near him when it happens." I crossed the hall. Scarn's head came up. His eyes found me, and there was still something in them that knew me, that had always known me, but there was more agony than knowing now, and when I reached toward him he snapped, teeth closing a hand's breadth from my fingers, and I heard the whole hall draw one breath. I did not pull back. I stood there with my hand out over the ruin of the animal who had shared my life, and I could not reach him. And I understood for the first time in my 31 years that there was a thing my crown and my strength and my name could not buy me, and it was standing on the other side of 6 inches of air, dying. "There's nothing to be done, Alaric's teeth," Bram whispered. I never learned which old oath he swore, only to make his end quick and yours. "Do not speak of my end in my own hall." The doors at the low end of the kennel opened. Cold air came in, and with it the smell of the winter woods and wood smoke and something green and sharp underneath, bruised herbs. Everyone turned. It was only the kennel maid. I knew her the way a king knows the furniture of his own keep, which is to say, not at all. She carried the slop and the straw and the water for the hunting hounds in the lower runs. I had seen her 100 times and looked at her not once. Gray eyes, a plain brown kirtle hair bound back under a kerchief, a basket of something over her arm. She was neither young the way the court counted young nor old. She was simply quiet, in the way that some people are so quiet that a room forgets they are in it. She stood in the doorway and looked at my dying wolf, and she did not go white the way the healers had. She went still. "Get her out of here," Bram said. "This is no place for a scullion." "I can help him," the maid said. The hall laughed. Not cruelly, men laugh that way when they are afraid, and someone has said an absurd thing that lets the fear out for a moment. Bram did not laugh. Bram had failed, and there is nothing a proud man hates like being failed at, and then being offered a lower hand's help. "Master healers of 3 provinces have looked at that wound," he said. "The wound is beyond craft, girl. Go back to your slops." She was already crossing the floor. "Stop her," someone said, and Rold moved, but I lifted my hand and Rold stopped because I was king and because, I will not lie to you and say I hoped. I had no hope left. But she moved toward Scarn the way no trained man in that hall had moved. Without fear and without hurry, the way you walk toward something you love that is hurt, and I had not seen anyone walk toward my wolf like that since I was a boy. "He'll kill you," Bram called after her. "No," she said, "he won't." And she knelt down in the dark stain on the flagstones, an arm's length from Skarn's teeth, and set her basket aside and held out one open hand. I have stood in 3 shield walls. I have watched the northern hosts come across the ice in the gray before dawn. I have never in my life been as afraid as I was watching that quiet woman kneel, unarmed in front of a wolf gone wild with dying. Skarn's lip peeled back. The growl started low in the floor of him and came up through the stone into my own bones. His head drew back to strike. She did not move her hand. She did not move at all. She only looked at him and she said something, not to the hall, not to me. She said it under her breath. 3 or 4 words in a tongue I did not know, old and round and soft, and then in plain speech, so low I only caught it because the whole hall had gone airless. I know it hurts. Let me. And Skarn, who had opened the arm of a master healer to the bone not an hour before, lowered his head, and pressed his great scarred muzzle into her open palm, and was still. The growls stopped. The hall's held breath went out all at once. And in my own chest, on the thread that had been burning for 3 days, something eased the smallest fraction, a single degree of a fever breaking. The first ease I had felt since the border, and it came up the thread from Skarn to me at the exact instant her hand touched him, and I put my own hand against the stone wall to keep my feet. I did not understand it yet. I only felt it, that when she touched my wolf, she touched me. "Bring me clean water," she said, still not looking away from Skarn, "and light, more light, close, and someone find me the marsh woundwort, the kind that grows blue, not the common sort. There will be dried in the still room if there's none fresh." A pause. "Please." No one moved. They were all looking at me. "Do it," I said, "all of it now." They ran. I lowered myself down onto the flagstones across from her, with my wolf between us, and I watched her hands. She had unstoppered a little horn of something and was easing it along the edges of the wound where the flesh had gone the wrong colors, and her hands did not shake, and they did not hurry. And Skarn, who I had raised from a pup, and who had never in 14 years let another living soul lay a hand on that scarred old body, Skarn let her. He whined once low, like a dog half his size, and she murmured to him and he let her. "How," I said, my voice would barely come, "how are you doing this?" She glanced up. It was the first time she truly looked at me, and I remember thinking, absurdly, in the middle of the worst night of my life, that her eyes were the gray of the woods just before snow. "He's not angry," she said simply. "He's frightened and he's in pain, and no one frightened and in pain wants a stranger's hands on the worst of it. So you don't come at the hurt. You come at the fear first." She looked back down at him. "The rest is only woundwort and time." Master Bram said the wound is past craft. Master Bram was afraid of him, she said, without spite, and a healer who is afraid of the beast can't heal the beast. That's all. She tilted her head. "The poison's still in it. I can draw most of it tonight. The rest will fight him for days, but he'll live." She paused. "The thread will hold." I had not told her of the thread. No one outside my council and the old moon priests knew that Skarn and I ran on one life. I stared at her. "What do you know of the thread?" For a moment something crossed her face. A flinch, quickly folded away. The look of someone who has said a true thing out loud that she has spent a lifetime learning not to say. "Nothing, sire," she said. "An old word, forget it." But I did not forget it, and I would never forget it, and that was the beginning. They brought the water and the blue woundwort and lamps, and she worked through the night. I did not leave. Rold begged me to rest. The council sent word twice that they must speak with me on the matter of the succession, and I sent word back that the matter of the succession could wait until dawn, since I did not, after all, intend to be dead by then. And with every hour that passed, the thing in my chest eased another degree. When she drew the black of the poison from the wound and pressed it out into a cloth, I felt the pull of it in my own ribs like a splinter easing free. When Skarn finally slept, truly slept, not the thrashing half-sleep of the dying, but deep and slow, his flank rising and falling, I felt my own first full breath in 3 days go all the way down, and I put my head back against the cold stone, and I could have wept, and I am not a man who weeps. She did not sleep. Near the gray of morning she sat back on her heels at last, her hands filthy and steady, and looked at the sleeping wolf with an expression I had no name for, not triumph, something closer to grief that had been set down. I watched her turn her right hand over in the lamplight and go still, staring at her own palm. "What is it?" I said. She closed her hand quickly. "Nothing, sire, a burn." She rose, unsteady, gathering her basket. "He'll want water and quiet when he wakes, and no strangers near for a day or two. Keep Master Bram from him. The wolf remembers his fear and won't rest with him close. She stopped. "You'll have your own healers now that the worst is done. You won't need a kennel maid underfoot. Show me your hand." "Sire." "Show me your hand, Neve." It was the first time I had said her name. I had had to ask Rold, in a whisper, an hour before, what the kennel maid was called, and Rold had had to ask a groom, because no one at my court knew the name of the woman who had just saved the life of their king. She hesitated a long moment. Then she opened her right hand, palm up, into the lamplight. There, across the center of her palm, where it had lain against Scarn's fur, was a mark, not a burn. It was silver, the pale moon silver of the old bondmarks, the ones the priests speak of and no living wolf of Highmark had worn in my lifetime, curled like a crescent laid against a thread, and it glowed faintly, the way a coal glows under ash, and as I looked at it I felt the thread in my own chest pull toward it, gently, the way a needle pulls north. I knew then. I had heard the tales at my grandmother's knee, like every wolf child of the north, that a bonded alpha's wolf will let no stranger touch the thread of him, will die before he lets a stranger's hand upon that deepest hurt, save one. Save the alpha's own fated mate, the one whose life the thread already knows, the one the wolf recognizes before the man ever does. The still hand, the old women called her. The one the beast will kneel to. She saw my face change, and she went pale, and she folded her hand shut over the mark as if she could hide what we had both just seen. "It means nothing," she said, and her voice shook for the first time all night. "It's an old mark. It runs in poor blood too sometimes. It doesn't mean." "It means," I said slowly, getting to my feet, "that my wolf knew you before I did." "Please," she whispered. "Sire, please. I only came because no one else would, and he was in such pain, and I couldn't stand in that doorway and watch him die when I knew I could help. That's all it was. Let me go back to the runs." "Don't," she looked, suddenly terrified in a way she had not been of the wolf. "Don't make me a thing the court talks about. I know what happens to women the court talks about." And there it was, some old wound of hers, older than tonight, that I did not yet understand. "You saved my life," I said, "and Scarn's. I do not intend to send the woman who saved my life back to carry slop in the lower runs." "That's exactly what I'm asking you to do," she said. She meant it. That was the strange thing. Every woman I had ever known who came near the throne came leaning toward it. Neve stood there in the gray morning with the moon mark folded shut in her fist and leaned away, toward the door, toward the runs, toward being no one again. I had spent my whole reign surrounded by people who wanted something from me. I did not know what to do with a woman whose whole want was to be let alone. "Go and sleep," I said at last, because I could see she was swaying on her feet. "You've been on this floor all night. Sleep and eat and see to nothing today. Scarn is mending, that's your doing." I paused. "We will speak of the rest when you've rested. I'm not sending you back to the runs, Neve. Put it out of your head." She opened her mouth to argue. Then Scarn, in his sleep, stretched one great paw across the straw until it touched her knee, and settled again with a long, low sound of contentment, and whatever she had been going to say went out of her. She looked down at my wolf's paw against her knee for a long moment. "He's a good animal," she said quietly. "He's been very brave." And she rose and gathered her basket and went, but she looked back once from the doorway at the sleeping wolf, and there was such tenderness in it, and such loneliness under the tenderness, that it stayed with me the whole of that day. The council came at midday, and they came in force. They found me changed and did not like it. An alpha 3 days from death does not usually rise from his own kennel floor and eat 2 men's breakfast and stand at the head of his war table with color in his face. And it unsettled them, because a dying king they could manage, and a living one they had to obey. "You're recovered," Lord Aldous said. He was the oldest of them and the one who had pressed hardest for the alliance match. "We give thanks to the moon for it. Whatever your healers did." "My healers did nothing. My healers fled." I set my hands flat on the table. "A kennel maid saved my wolf and my life last night, on the floor of the great hall, with blue woundwort in her own 2 hands, after every master healer in 3 provinces stood back against the wall and told me it was hopeless." Silence. I watched them exchange the look that councils exchange when a king has said something inconvenient, and they must decide whether to correct him. "A remarkable stroke of luck," Aldous said carefully. "It was not luck." I told them of the mark. I am not, by nature, a man who confides in his counsel, but I wanted it on the table in the light where they could not later pretend it away. A moon-silver bondmark on her palm that surfaced the instant she touched him. My wolf accepted her hand upon the thread of him. "You are all northern-born. You know what that means." Bram was there, restored to his color and to his pride, and he stepped forward at once. "Sire, with respect, a mark on a scullion's hand proves nothing. Blotches, burns, birth stains, the poor are covered in them. That the animal happened to come for her, animals are unpredictable, and she has the smell of the kennels on her. No doubt he took her for one of his own handlers." "You did not see it, Master Bram," I said, "because you were pressed to the wall with your apprentices, watching a woman half your training do the thing you swore could not be done." I let that sit. He went red. "You will not speak against her again in my hearing." "My king." Aldous spread his hands, gentling the way you gentle a horse near a cliff edge. "No one doubts the girl did you a great service, and she'll be rewarded richly for it, that goes without saying. But the succession cannot wait on kennel marks and moon tails. You nearly died with no Luna and no heir. The kingdom looked into the pit these 3 days. The border lords watched us bleed and wondered whether Highmark is a house worth keeping faith with." He leaned in. "The alliance with the Vale is arranged. The lady is highborn, well-favored and willing. Seal it within the month and the north settles overnight. Delay, and the wolves that circled us this week come again in the spring." He softened his voice. "You know I have only ever wanted Highmark strong." He was not wrong about any of it, and that was the trouble. The Vale match was wise. The lady was gracious. I had met her twice, and found nothing to dislike and nothing to love, which is what the wisest matches are made of. A month ago I would have signed it without a second thought, because a month ago I had a dying wolf and a burning thread and no reason on earth to believe there was any other kind of match to be had. Now there was a mark on a quiet woman's hand, and my wolf's paw stretched across the straw to touch her knee in his sleep, and a thread in my own chest that had eased the moment she knelt. "Give me until the next full moon," I said. Aldous frowned. "Sire." "The next full moon, 12 days. If at the end of it I have no better answer than the Vale, I will sign the Vale, and gladly, and thank you for your patience." I looked round the table. 12 days will not lose us the north, but I have just spent 3 days learning what it is to nearly lose a thing I did not know I could not live without, and I will not be hurried into the rest of my life by men who have never felt the thread burn. They did not like it, but a recovered alpha at the head of his own war table is not a thing a council overrules, and they bowed, and they went, and Aldous lingered at the door. "She saved your life, Torin," he said quietly. "He was old enough to have known my father, and used my name when the others had gone. That earns her gold and a warm house to the end of her days. It does not earn her a crown. There's a difference, and a king who forgets it makes the whole north pay for his gratitude. He was not unkind. 12 days, be sure." I went to Scarn. He was awake, and better. the wound already losing its evil colors, the fever down. He knew me and thumped his tail once against the straw, and I knelt and put my forehead against the great scarred slab of his head the way I had done since I was a boy, and for a while neither of us needed anything more than that. "You knew her," I said to him. "Before I did, you knew her all along." His ear turned toward the low door, and I understood he had known her for years. She carried the water to the runs. She had passed the door of his kennel 1,000 times, and some part of him, the part that ran on the thread, had known each time that his alpha's mate was passing by, and had said nothing because a wolf cannot speak, and had waited, patient as only an animal can be patient, until the night he was dying gave her a reason to cross the floor at last. "You might have limped for her sooner," I told him. "You might have saved us all a great deal of trouble." He sighed enormously the way he did, and I laughed for the first time in a week, and it hurt, and it was good. I found her that evening, not in the runs but on the shrine path above the keep, the old moon shrine that half the court had forgotten, a ring of standing stones about a shallow silver pool, where the priests of my grandmother's time had read the marks of the bonded. She was sitting on the low stone with her knees drawn up, looking at the first stars, and she did not hear me until I was close, and when she turned and saw the king standing there, she began to rise, and I said, "No, sit, please. I didn't climb all this way to make you stand up again." She sat. I lowered myself onto the cold stone a little apart from her, and for a while we watched the sky go from gray to blue-black together, and it was strangely easy, the way it is easy with almost no one. "You've come to talk me into something," she said at last. "I can tell. You have the look my mother had when she decided a thing and hadn't told me yet." "I've come to ask you something," I said, "and I want the true answer, not the one you think a king wants." I turned the moment over. "Last night you knew of the thread before I named it, and the mark on your hand didn't surprise you the way it surprised me. You've known what you are for a long time, haven't you?" She was quiet for a long moment. The pool below us held the rising moon. "My grandmother told me," she said finally. "Before she died. She had it too, the still hand, animals mostly. She never spoke of thread or alphas. That was old blood, and she said old blood only ever brought grief to the poor. She told me, you'll feel a thing someday like a rope you didn't know was tied to you going taut. And when you feel it, she said, you run the other way. Because the great houses don't marry their mate marks, Neve, they use them. A poor girl with the still hand heals their prize beasts and warms no throne. And when she's used up they set her aside, and there's no protecting a woman the whole court knows was the king's and isn't any more." She looked at her own hands. She'd seen it happen to her own sister in another hold when she was young. "So when I came here as a girl to carry water and I passed the great wolf's door and felt the rope go taut, I ran the other way. For years. I carried the slop and I kept my eyes down, and I never once let myself go near him, though every day of it I could feel him hurting to be near." Her voice thinned. "And then he was dying, and I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't stand in the doorway and let him die of a thing I could mend just to keep myself safe. So I stopped running." She turned to me, and there were tears in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "And now here you are, exactly as she warned me. Come to use the still hand." The unfairness of it took the breath from me, that she had spent years in my own keep, close enough to touch, feeling the same pull I would have given the kingdom to feel, and had made herself small and silent out of a fear I had given her every reason to hold, because it was true. It was what my kind had always done to hers. "Neve," I said, "look at me." She did. "I am not going to use you and set you aside. I am not going to heal my wolf on your hands and send you back to the runs with gold in your fist and call it fair. The thread does not run one way. You felt me pull. I felt you ease me the moment you knelt. That's not a servant and a beast. That's a mate bond, the true one, the kind my house has not seen in living memory, and I would sooner sign away the veil and half my border than treat the rarest gift the moon ever gave a king as a thing to be used up." I held her gaze. "But I will not command it either. That's the other half of what your kind fears, the great house that takes. I won't take." If you tell me tonight that you want the gold and the quiet house and never to see the inside of my court, you'll have it, and my word of protection over it for the rest of your life, and I'll sign the veil at the full moon and never trouble you again." I found the words came hard because I meant them, and meaning them cost me. "It has to be your choice. It's the only way it's worth anything." She stared at me for a long time. The moon climbed, and something in her face, some brace she had held so long she'd forgotten it was there, loosened, just slightly, the way Scarn's growl had loosened under her palm. "You'd truly let me go," she said, "if I asked." "I'd hate it," I said honestly, "but yes." "That," she said very quietly, "is the first thing anyone of your rank has ever offered me that my grandmother didn't warn me about." She looked down at the silver pool. "Give me the 12 days too. I've spent years learning to run from this. I can't unlearn it in a night just because the king turned out to be kind. Let me be near him, near Scarn, while he mends. Let me see if the thing my grandmother feared and the thing you're offering are truly two different things. And at the full moon I'll give you my answer, and it will be the true one." She almost smiled. "That's fair, isn't it? You gave your council 12 days to convince you. Give me the same." "That's fair," I said, and it was the easiest bargain I ever struck, because it was the first time in my reign anyone had asked me only for time, and not for a single thing more. They were the strangest 12 days of my life, and I would live them again 100 times. She came each morning to tend Scarn, and each morning I found some reason to be there, and after the first 3 days I stopped pretending the reasons were about the wolf. We talked over his mending flank of the runs, of her grandmother, of the border war, of small foolish things. She had a dry, quiet wit that came out sideways when she forgot to guard it, and the first time she made me laugh outright she looked as startled as if the wolf had done it. Scarn healed faster with her there than my healers had any right to expect. The wound closed clean, the fever gone, and with it the last shadow off the thread in my own chest, so that by the 6th day I stood on my own walls in the cold and felt more wholly alive than I had in years, and knew it was her doing, all of it. The court watched. Of course the court watched. Bram nursed his humiliation and let it be known, in the careful way of proud men, that the kennel witch had bewitched the beast and was working now on the king. Some of the great ladies who had hoped their own daughters might catch my eye found reasons to be cold to her in the corridors. Aldous said nothing, which from Aldous was the loudest thing of all, and Neve bore it exactly as she had borne the doorway on that first night, without flinching, without complaint, asking nothing, defending herself to no one, and it made me want, with a fierceness that surprised me, to set every one of them right. But I had promised not to take, and taking would have included forcing my court to honor her before she'd chosen to be honored. So I held my tongue, and I waited, and I let her see day by day that the thing I offered and the thing she feared were not the same thing. On the 9th day the Lady of the Veil arrived, unannounced, to see for herself the alpha who kept delaying their match. She was everything Aldous had promised, gracious, clear-eyed, high-born to her fingertips, and she was, I will say to her lasting credit, far cleverer than the men who arranged us. She spent one evening at my table, watching, and she watched the right things. She watched where my eyes went, and she watched a quiet woman slip in at the low door to speak a word to the kennel master about the great wolf's supper, and she watched me lose the thread of my own sentence when that quiet woman appeared. And the next morning she asked to walk with me on the walls, alone. "You're not going to marry me," she said, without preamble, looking out over the winter woods. "Are you?" I owed her honesty. "I don't know yet. I gave my counsel until the full moon, but no, I don't think I am." She nodded slowly, unoffended. "The one who saved your wolf. It was not a question. They told me the tale on the road, and I thought it a peasant fancy. Then I watched you at supper." A wry glance. "You looked at your own soup, my lord, the way I have never in my life had a man look at me, and you looked at her like a man who's found water in a country he thought was all drought." She turned back to the woods. "I'll not hold you to a match against that. I've no wish to spend my life across the table from a man whose heart is in the kennels. And a Luna, A wolf king's own bonded beast will kneel to, that's a thing out of the old songs. I'd not want to be the one who stood in the way of it, and had the North whisper for 40 years that I'd married the king out from under his fate. She almost smiled. Tell your Lord Aldous I released you. It will cost him less pride to hear it from me than from you. I have honored few people in my life the way I honored her in that moment. The veil will have my friendship for this, I said, for as long as I'm king. Ask me for anything short of the crown and it's yours. I'll settle for the alliance without the marriage, she said. Trade rights through the pass and your wolves at our back if the Ice Lords come. Sensible things. She put out her hand like a man and I took it. You've a good heart, Alpha of Highmark. Don't let your council talk you out of it. They mean well and they'd have you die of good sense. And she went home the next morning, and the alliance she brokered with her own dignity held the North together better than any marriage could have, and I never forgot the debt. But that is not the part of the 12 days I return to, when I am old and the fire is low. The part I return to is the 11th night. The 11th night, a blizzard came down off the passes, the worst of that winter. And in the black of it a rider came half frozen to the gate, a boy from a shepherd croft high on the west slope, blue-lipped, barely able to speak, with a tale of a whole flock and 2 of his family's herding wolves caught in a drift on the high pasture, and his grandfather gone out after them and not come back. By the old law it was no work for a king to ride into a killing storm after one crofter's grandfather. Aldous said as much, flatly, in the war hall. But I was on the thread again, in a way. I could not stand warm by my fire and let an old man and his beasts freeze on my own slopes, not after the week I'd had of learning what one dying animal could teach a king about mercy. I called for scarn, healed and eager, and for horses, and for men willing to ride. Neve was already dressed for the cold when I came down. "You're not coming," I said. "The wolves in that drift will be terrified and half frozen, and they won't let your handlers near them," she said, wrapping a second scarf. "And a frightened wolf in a storm is how good men lose hands. You need the still hand up there and you know it." "I'm coming." She looked at me steadily. "You said you wouldn't command me. That runs both ways. You don't get to command me to stay by the fire either." I looked at her, and I thought of her grandmother's warning, and of every reason a wise king should have ordered her to stay, and then I thought of the doorway on the first night. I couldn't stand there and watch him die when I knew I could help, and I understood that this was simply who she was, all the way down, and that a man does not get to love the courage and forbid the cost of it. "Then stay close to me," I said, "and if I tell you to turn back, you turn back." "If it's sensible, I'll turn back," she said, which was not the same thing, and we both knew it, and I loved her for it, and we rode out into the storm. It was as bad as any night I've known. We found the old man first, alive, barely, dug half into the lee of a rock, and my men got him onto a horse and started him down. The flock we found by their bleeding, and the 2 herding wolves were where the shepherd boy had said, tangled in a frozen drift, one of them with a leg twisted under it, both of them wild with cold and fear and snapping at the handlers who tried to reach them, exactly as she'd said they would be. And Neve went to them across the snow, the way she had gone across the kennel floor, without fear, without hurry, and she knelt down in the drift with the wind screaming and put out her open hand, and she said her 3 soft words in the old round tongue, and the wolves, strangers' wolves, not even of my pack, with no thread to her at all. The wolves went still and let her free the trapped leg, and let my men lift them out. I sat my horse in the howling dark and watched her do it, and I stopped, in that moment, being a king weighing a wise decision against an unwise one. It was not the mark on her palm that decided me in the end. It was not the thread, or the prophecy, or the songs. It was a woman on her knees in a killing storm, gentling frightened animals that were nothing to her, for no reward and no witness but me, being, when no crown was watching, exactly what she had been in my hall. Good, all the way through, in the plain, unshowy way that the loud world never counts until it is dying and needs it. We got them all down alive. The old man, the boy, the flock, both wolves. Not one life lost on my slopes that night. And in the gray, exhausted dawn, in the warm of the great hall with the storm still shaking the shutters, I stood in front of her while the men saw to the horses, and I did not say any of the grand things a king is supposed to say. I said, the full moon's tomorrow, but I already have my answer, whatever yours is. So I'll say mine now, and you can take your day still to say yours. I love you, not the still hand, you, the woman who wouldn't stay by the fire. I'd have you as my Luna and my mate and the mother of whatever the moon gives us before the whole court with every honor of my house for the rest of my life. And if your answer's no, I'll still thank the moon every day that you crossed my hall, and I'll never once make you sorry you did. I ran out of steady voice. That's all. That's everything I have. She looked at me for a long moment, snow melting in her hair, and I watched the last of her grandmother's fear go out of her. Not because I'd argued it away, but because I'd spent 12 days and one killing storm showing her, and showing was the only thing that ever could. My grandmother was wrong, she said softly. She wasn't wrong about the great houses, but she was wrong that they're all the same. She stepped in and took my scarred cold hand in her marked one, and the moon-silver crescent glowed against my skin, and the thread in my chest pulled true and singing and easy. Yes, she said, the true answer, yes. We were bound at the full moon, one day later in the old shrine above the keep, and again in the great hall before the whole of the court. And the court, that had whispered kennel witch in its corridors, came to the hall that day to watch its king marry a woman who carried the water, and it came doubting. I did not argue them out of it, Scarn did. We stood before the shrine stone, Neve and I, and the priest spoke the old words, and Lord Aldous stood at the front with his face carefully composed and his doubt in every line of him, and half the great ladies behind him wore the same. And then my wolf, healed, whole, the iron gray of him gleaming, rose from where he lay at the edge of the hall, and he crossed the whole length of that great room, past the counselors, past the ladies, past the men who had called her witch, through a silence so total I could hear the fire crackle. And he came to Neve, and he lay down at her feet, and he laid his great scarred head across the toes of her plain shoes and let out a long, low sound of contentment. The same sound he'd made on the first night when her paw touched his knee, and he closed his eyes. The wolf that had let no living soul but me lay a hand on him in 14 years. The wolf whose life ran on one thread with the king's, bowed in front of the entire court to the kennel maid, and told them, in the one language even a doubting northern lord cannot argue with, exactly who she was. And the moon mark on her palm blazed silver, bright enough that the whole hall saw it, the true bond mark none of them had seen in a lifetime, and I lifted her marked hand in mine so all of them could see it plain. Aldous was the first to kneel. He was old enough to have believed the songs when he was young, and honest enough, under all his good sense, to know one come true when it lay at his feet. He went down slowly on one knee, an old man bowing to a woman who a fortnight before had carried his hunting hound's water. And one by one, down the whole length of that hall, the court of Highmark followed him down, the great ladies and the war captains, and last of all Master Bram, red-faced and undone, kneeling to the still hand he had called a scullion's blotch. Neve stood in the center of it, my wolf at her feet and her hand in mine and the mark alight, and she did not gloat, and she did not weep. She looked out over the bowing hall with the same quiet steadiness she'd worn in the doorway on the first night, when she was no one, when a room could forget she was in it, and she was, I thought, exactly the same woman she had always been. The court had simply, finally, learned to see her. "You don't have to bow to me," she said to them, and her clear voice carried to the back of the hall. "I carried your water a fortnight ago, and I'd carry it again tomorrow if it needed carrying. I'm no different than I was." She looked down at Scarn and rested her marked hand a moment on his great head. "But he's alive, and so is your king. That's all I ever wanted from any of you, only to be let near enough to help." A pause and the ghost of that dry wit. "You might remember that next time it's a kennel maid at the door." I have been Alpha of Highmark for many years now, and I have won battles the bards still sing, and none of them made me half so proud as standing in that hall and hearing my Luna tell my kneeling court to mind who they turn away at the door. We are old now, or near enough that the young ones think so. Scarn lived a long full life for a wolf, and died at last in his sleep with his head in her lap and mine on his flank, both of us gone gray around the muzzle by then, and we buried him under the shrine stones where the thread first pulled true, and neither of us was ashamed of how we wept. There is a young gray wolf in the kennels now, out of his line, who lets no one near him but Neve. Some things run deeper than one life, and our own children learn to walk with their hands in his fur. I did not give the North a marriage alliance in the end. I gave it a Luna the border lords rode days to have healed their beasts, a Luna the common folk brought their sick lambs to at the shrine, a Luna who never once forgot the doorway she came in by, and so was kind always to whoever stood in the next one. The veil is our truest friend to this day, and the lady who released me is godmother to my eldest, and every full moon I climb the shrine path with my mate, and think of a quiet woman kneeling unafraid on a bloodied floor. I asked her once late why she truly crossed that hall the first night, when she'd spent years running the other way, when she knew what my kind did to hers, when every wise thing said stay in the doorway and let the wolf and the king die and keep yourself safe. She thought about it a long while. In the firelight, the moon mark faded now to a soft pale scar in her palm. Because he was frightened, she said at last, and in pain, and no one else would go to him. And I have never in my life been able to stand in a doorway and let a frightened thing die alone, whatever it cost me. That's the whole of it, Torin. That's all I ever was. I took her marked hand in my old scarred one, the way I had in the storm dawn a lifetime before, and I did not say anything, because there was nothing to add. She had told me the truth in the kennel on the very first night, when she said she'd only come because no one else would. I had simply needed a whole life to understand that it was the truest and the rarest thing I would ever hear.